Right, everybody, we've sorted out the technical issues. So, good evening, welcome. I'm Councillor Sarah Barwick, the Chair of the Planning, Healthier, Stronger Community Policy Advisory Committee, and I am pleased to welcome you to this meeting. The meeting will be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel. Will anyone else be recording the proceedings? Thank you. I ask so that people at the meeting will know if this will be happening. If the fire alarm sounds during the meeting, please remain seated and members of the Democratic Service team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. There has been a change in the running order. Item 13 will now be taken after item 10. Right. Apologies. Any apologies? I have Councillor Harper. Yes. And I have Councillor Gooch, you as substitute. Thank you. Item 3, there are no urgent items. Item 4, are there any visiting members?
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Millam here because HMOs have been said, so I have been summoned. So I'll be here for agenda 15.
Thank you. Item 5, are there any disclosures by members or officers?
Yeah, regarding agenda item 30, UK Shared Prosperity Fund, I'm an employee of Involve Kent, but I'm not directly involved in the project that was funded through this fund.
Thank you. Item 6, are there any disclosures of lobbying? Thank you. Item 7, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possibility of disclosure of information. I move that all items be taken in public. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of February. Are there any comments on accuracy of the minutes? No. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of February be approved as a correct record and signed. Agreed? Thank you. Item 9, forward planning relating to the committee's terms of reference. Are there any comments on the forward plan? Or Councillor, yes.
I just wanted to ask about the walking and cycling plan. I think we had sort of a brief update at the last meeting, but I'm not sure if we've moved forward after that.
No, because I think devolution might have gotten in the way briefly. I don't know if any of the officers can give us an update when it will come back. The cycling and walking, or walking and cycling.
Right. Our following discussion at the Policy Advisory Committee around the perceived shortcomings of the cycling and walking strategy, there was determination from this Policy Advisory Committee that we look at developing something that is far more focused and therefore doesn't dissipate our energy and our treasure across a very wide area where there is very little gain to be achieved. So following that, Cabinet discussed those recommendations from this committee and determined that we would talk to Kent County Council colleagues about our options. And last time I came to this committee, I talked about the options that Kent County Council gave us, which was either stick with the walking and the cycling and walking strategy template, or do something which is slightly different, though that was less likely to attract KCC funding, though it may actually be better for things like community infrastructure levy cash and for other funding streams. So the upshot of that is that Cabinet determined to go for the bespoke document, which is focused very much on the very specific blockers to active travel. So things, for example, like the Bridge Gyratory, where we know it's very difficult to get into town from the very populous areas to the west of Maidstone, or for children getting to and from schools and so on. Subsequent to that, there have been discussions with our transport consultants, and it is agreed that there was a lot of work done that colleagues might remember when the town centre strategy was put together, looking at some of these very kind of specific access issues that were pertaining to the town, and that is now going into the forward plan. So we will have a document, but it will not be an all singing, all dancing, massive borough-wide one. It will pick off, because we haven't got much time left, the few very problematic sites in the borough, and we will model and come up with potential solutions for them, so that if there is grant funding and cash available, we will have a ready-made solution to overcome some of those active travel barriers. Sorry if that was long, but it's been quite a long journey from the original kind of very expansive approach to now something that's far more boiled down to the basics of those specific blockers.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions, comments? No, thank you. So I move that the forward plan be noted and agreed. Agreed? Thank you. Moving on to item 10, the events programme on pages 10 to 23 for 2025-2026. This is for noting. Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So it's a great privilege to introduce this report on the events programme 25-26 with the bland heading purpose of report for noting. I must insist that we do a little bit more than note it. We're told in the political world that you can expect events, dear boy, events. We certainly have very pleasant events on these pages at length. I confess, and I invite you to join with me in discovering that there is a huge amount going on in Maidstone Borough that, until I got to sit in this chair and hold this portfolio, I had next to no idea about, because I was otherwise busy and finding ways of keeping myself occupied. I would like to suggest that that may be a lesson for many people outside of this room, and invite your attention to celebrate it and be grateful for what we have. Just to briefly point out, on page 16, you can see a page and a third of events that are funded by Maidstone Borough Council. On page 18, you can see the MBC partnership relationship over nearly 2 pages, and over even more pages, you can see the partnership arrangements. So when we describe administratively that as part of the council's strategic priority, a fairer economy for people and planet, and the commitments made in our local investment plan to deliver the Levelling Up agenda, an annual events programme of significant scale has been developed, comprising events run by the council and with partners and with other organisations. The summary shows you what's been delivered in 24-25 and the forward-looking events, and I've explained the categories in these pages. I would very much like to give our excellent officer, Anne-Marie Langley, a moment to tell us, perhaps if I could invite you to tell us a little bit about the excellent relationships with some of those wider partners, because that is a big thing that I have learnt in the conversations that we've had, and it would be good to hear you reflect a little bit about that, so that members can hear just how wide the network is beyond Maidstone House.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, we work quite closely with a lot of different organisations, particularly One Maidstone. They're a big support to us and we support them in their events as well. We work closely with the Hazlitt Theatre, Kent Arts and Wellbeing. They organise bandstand concerts for us every summer. They're also helping with the VE Day concert this year. We couldn't deliver them without their support. The Hazlitt Theatre do an awful lot with us. We support their touring outdoor theatre. They're taking it out into the wider borough, which is really important, reaching out to different communities, not just the town centre people, which is great. So yeah, One Maidstone, we work with them with a Light Up Festival. We support a lot of the trails that they do around town, which help encourage footfall. There are a lot of community arts organisations doing really great things, and it's been my privilege to be able to support them and work with them to deliver events for the benefit of everyone in Maidstone. So yeah, I can give more specific information about different organisations if there's any that you're particularly interested in, but there are a lot, and there is a lot happening in Maidstone all the time.
Thank you. Councillor Russell.
Thank you. It's packed full year, which is excellent to see, but I just wanted to really draw out the VE Day 80th anniversary celebrations. I think that's going to be a fantastic weekend, and I know that lots of villages, obviously I'm from rural side of the borough, but you know, we have street parties and bunting and all of that, and I just think it's really good to see that coming to the town as well, and have all the bunting and have it right through the town. That's going to be really good, and I'm sure we'll find out more what's going on as we get closer to the date. But yeah, well done for including that weekend. That'd be brilliant.
Yes, Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. Well done, Anne-Marie. Brilliant. I do have one question. VE Day, yes, absolutely terrific amongst all the other stuff. What about VJ Day on September the 3rd? Is anybody, can you just help me on that one, please? September 3rd or 15th or something?
Second.
Oh, well,
Yeah, I have allocated some budget to support a VJ Day event. I don't know the details of that personally, but I have allocated some funding to support it. Yeah. So it will be on the list eventually when I know what's being delivered. Yes.
My colleague and friend Dave Nagy is currently working up some proposals on the VJ celebrations. Obviously, as that's later in the calendar, the focus has been on the earlier event. But I can assure you that those servicemen and women and others who are involved in the campaign against Japan will not be forgotten, and that will be adequately, more than adequately celebrated.
Thank you, because actually that was one of the questions I was going to ask, being that my father was out in Burma with the Gurkhas, and we have Gurkhas retired in this in Maidstone. So thank you for asking that. It saved me doing it. Any other questions? And yeah, thank you very much for that work. That is very good. So I know we're only noting it, but can I have your agreement that we? Yes, with thanks. Yeah. Is that agreed? Thank you. Now moving on to item 13 and that is the shared. Ooh. Thank you. Thank you. That's Councillor Thomas again.
Thank you, Chair. Again, so the UK Shared Prosperity Fund extension, well, it is exciting because it means we have some more money. The government extended the UK SPF funding to a 4th year. We were kept on tenterhooks earlier in the year to discover whether or not this money would arrive. We've been granted just over £390,000. As the previous plan had cross-council and external stakeholder support in its creation, we have decided it isn't broke, so we're not going to fix it and leave it exactly as it is, extending the themes into year 4 with the projects that you can see outlined in the report. The headings in our council programme are Pride in Place and Increasing Footfall in our Town Centre, and those are 2 of the key focal points of the UK SPF spending. We use the money to fund events, which you have just seen ample evidence of, arts and culture, greening projects, all with the aspiration to lift the tone and create a more vibrant town centre that people will want to spend time in. And we will extend that, as is the aspiration of our cross-cutting ambitions to the river through funding events and activities. So there will be regular progress reports to this committee and to Cabinet. I would like to invite Anne-Marie again, in particular, to give us some information in Project See the Arts Hub and Makerspace, which are in your notes on page 49, because I have a little inkling that she's quite excited about it and would be very keen to tell you a little more.
Just toss a coin over there.
Is that working? Yeah, better. Yeah, so really just to take the opportunity to thank all the different officers and councillors who've been involved in making this a success. We've been able to deliver a lot of different things across the council with this money, and I feel it's made a real difference. And I'm really proud of some of the things I've seen and the things we've been able to do, particularly Anne-Marie's work. So we've done quite a lot there, but also the greening and the lighting, seeing all those assets being brought up to spec and looking a lot better, things feeling a lot safer, lifting the tone. And the other thing I'd highlight is this plan was developed with our stakeholders. So part of the requirements of government 3 years ago when they asked us, when they allocated the funding, was we had to come up with a local investment plan, and that had to be developed with local stakeholders. So as a result of that, we now have an anchor institutions meeting that meets regularly. That meeting's updated with progress on this plan, and we get to work on other things with that group as well. So I've been really pleased that we've got another round of funding. We're able to continue the good work we've already started. And one of the projects is the Creative Makerspace, so the Community Arts Hub and Makerspace. That's been a really new and interesting, exciting thing for us as a council. I think Anne-Marie's quite stressed by it, but it has been really good to see it get on board. And having this money this year has meant we're able to take that next step in the process. So I'll let Anne-Marie talk about the plans for that for this year. Thank you. So the contractors are starting on site on Monday, and they will be refurbishing units 2 to 4 Granada House in Gabriel's Hill to create 7 individual artist studios, 2 meeting rooms, an exhibition space, a retail area, and a social space where artists and creatives and members of the public can come in, network, collaborate, take part in classes, workshops and things like that. We're hoping that we will get a lovely lead artist to come on board and develop a programme of public engagement activities so that we can run regular classes and workshops and build a real community around arts and creativity at that centre. There is obviously an element of supporting the creative sector as well, which is why we've got the artist studios. It's important for them to have somewhere to start their business, move off of the kitchen table, out of the garage and into a proper studio. And also having the exhibition space is something that's really important because there are so few opportunities for them to exhibit and share their work. So I'm really excited about this. It's a lot of work, but it's all coming together. We're hoping that the works will be finished early May, so potentially looking to open mid to late June this year, but that's yet to be confirmed, obviously subject to the works programme.
Thank you very much for that report. Any questions, queries? Yeah.
I just want to add, as a town centre ward member, how useful some of these projects are to the revitalisation and regeneration of the town and the extension of our economy. With the shift in functions of town centres, it's really important to actually have things to replace some of the retail offer in the town centre and give people reasons to come into the town. So it's quite important. And tremendous amount of work has been done on this. Lest people think we're being too town centre centric, we have to be with this particular project. I do understand that we are likely now to actually receive a further slice of the Rural Prosperity Fund. So investment in rural communities will be looked at, but we have not yet been told the amount or the exact date when we're likely to get it. But I did think people needed to know that as a sort of balancing factor, so that we're not just looking at one part of the borough.
Thank you. So no more comments. I'm looking for a proposer. Thank you. And a seconder. So we have that. We've got those. So that was Councillor Greenman proposed and Councillor Colliard seconded. Thank you. Is that everyone in agreement? Thank you. Right, moving back to item 11. So introduced. So this is the quarterly update report. This is to be introduced by Adrian.
I'll give you the update on the Q3 finance position. I'll give a bit of context in terms of where we are with position with Maidstone as well as a whole. So in the last quarter, we've managed to improve the position. So we were looking at about 449,000 overspend. And that's improved now. We've got about £49,000 overspend. So the two key things around recruitment and just pushing down on spend has improved that position. So for this particular pack, that's also improved. So we're looking at about £800,000 overspend compared to about 1.4 previously, which is good news. In terms of the revenue overspends or the changes, so they're sort of the key three areas remain in terms of the Lockmeadow complex where we had the vacancies, in terms of the vacant units. They're obviously now been filled, which is good news. So it will be good to have that less problem for that going forward. We're obviously still having the issues around the planning income, as we know that sort of is struggling where we have all this year, just in terms of the volume of planning applications coming through. You'll hopefully remember from the budget papers we put some extra budget into there to deal with that, so hopefully that will be less of a problem going forward. And then there's a general underspend on the planning policy world, just as they're refocusing what they're looking at and looking at other areas. In terms of capital, projected at this stage about spend about 4.6. That's obviously behind overall budget, so underspend of about 5.2. Key sort of two areas of slippage, and that is infrastructure delivery. As we know, that's broadly because there are no more schemes coming forward from the other areas that we would support in that area. So we're still sort of waiting for some of those to come forward, and then some on the street lighting and greening programme, which is slight underspend so far on that. And obviously a lot of that's to do with the town centre strategy and just a slight delay in that. So hopefully that will next year progress forward. as you say, this is just a noting, but I'm also happy to take questions as we go forward.
Thank you, Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chair. It was just the point really about the planning policy spends below forecast to date as work on the local plan hasn't progressed as far as it's been anticipated. And it was just ringing a cautionary bell really, because we had a 1-year break between the 2017 and the recent local plan, and then we got back on the wheel, and yet the end of the local plan process, you know, we did have to move on really, really quickly, and it is a wheel that we never get off of. So we've had 1 year now already since the adoption nearly, where we haven't done any potential work streams on the new local plan. And I know it says work streams will be starting up shortly. Maybe the wording there is not quite correct, but if the work streams are starting up shortly, we've lost over a year, and we will just be pushing so quickly on the next local plan. And I think a lot of the comments on the previous one was we didn't have time to do this certain work streams. We didn't have time to look through all the policies in detail. There was so many comments about how things were rushed. And I just really want to ring that warning bell that we've lost 1 year. We can't afford to keep losing time. We need to start up these work streams because it is a wheel that we never climb off of because it's done by Central. So thank you.
Anybody else? Thank you. So this is just for noting. Do we agree? Thank you.
Yes. Can I just ask? I wondered if there was a comment to what my colleague had just said, because I thought it was quite a reasonable comment to make. Is there a bit of feedback to say yes, all right, or no, it's fine, or sorry, Chairman, but
I don't know whether my colleague, the cabinet member for planning policy, wants to comment, but I would observe as deputy leader that there has actually been quite a lot of work going on, but it doesn't necessarily translate into things that you would that ordinary members would see, because the large part of doing the work for the local plan review is and the next local plan is actually collecting the evidence base, and that is something that you don't necessarily see a lot of until quite a way on in the process. In relation to some of the SPDs, well, we've got a HMO SPD on the agenda this evening. The 3 stakeholder SPDs are moving forward. Well, 2 of them, the 3rd one, Invicta, there may be issues with the national defence situation, but we can't be held responsible for that. And Tony might want to add something about the Gypsy and Travellers SPD and other thing, and the landscape SPD. What we are moving forward, I think, as an administration as quickly as we can, but it has to be said that there are a lot of calls on officer time and a limited number of resources.
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Councillor Geach, for getting my answer for me. Yeah. Oh, were you going? Yeah, go, Councillor Harwood. You.
I mean, the basic point is we inherited, to my mind, a very insubstantial local plan, which did not have the evidential underpinning. And that means that we've kind of the horse has been put after the cart, and that so much time is being taken up with the supplementary planning documents for the kind of bloated allocations of the strategic sites, which are so difficult to take forward. The inspector was quite light touch at the hearing, and therefore there's a huge amount of work to go in. But we have to report to government. Planning policy, spatial planning is very tightly controlled in terms of what we do and when we do it. And then we have to put the statement in, which we've just put in, stating what our programme is for the coming year. But in terms of the treadmill that's been talked about, in May, that starts in earnest with the various strategic housing land assessments and so on that will go on, and it all feeds into the process. But essentially, this local authority, like all local authorities, follows the national guidance. There is a spanner thrown in the works, obviously, which is local government reorganisation, and there is advice awaited, which we have not had yet, on what the approach is going to be in terms of authorities like ours that are going to be reorganised out of existence. But it might be worthwhile, if you do want kind of chapter and verse, Mr. Edgerton coming in here, just from the officer perspective, to set out some of the detail.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, the next step which we really need to take, which is going to be something which is very publicly visible, is the work around our housing land supply and the performance of local plan review in that regard, as well as the impact of the macroeconomic picture, which is having an impact on all areas across the country. So we will hope to be in a position where we can understand better the completions position, future housing land supply position in the coming months and hopefully by the summer. The other thing which I would like to add from a technical point of view is that we are at the moment beholden on the government to let us know how they wish to take forward the new planning system and production of local plans. This is purely a matter of fact. It's a technical observation, but we don't really wish to progress too far until the governments have clarified how they wish to take forward the strategic planning system across the country in future. They are slowly releasing information. Had a little bit of release of information over the last few days, in fact, but there is much more to come. And only today they announced that they would be introducing policy around protected landscapes as well, which of course is going to be quite important to this borough. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Russell.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on a couple of points there. So as an ordinary member, it's that a question really for Mr. Edgerton: how long do you think a local plan takes in reality to take it through all of its rungs? Would you say we're talking about a 2-year period for the examination that we would need to build in, as in if you were doing a Gantt chart, those 2 years would be immovable in that process?
Just purely factually again, you know, if we were talking about what I would call the current system, the present system, where authorities are scrambling to get over the line because they haven't managed to get their local plans in place, unlike Maidstone, then yes, I mean, if it's a fairly controversial examination in public, 2 years would be something which is a sort of a maximum value that you would expect for the examination to take, with multiple rounds of hearings taking place within that time. What we don't know is what the government will end up doing under the new system. And this is a genuine point, because their idea is to try and speed up the policy production process. 30 months has been talked about as something from start to finish and so forth under the new system, but the details have not been forthcoming, and nor have they been confirmed. So the examination would have to take place within that period, and we can only anticipate that the government would anticipate something far shorter in terms of the examination within that overall 30-month process. So at the moment, that's my view. It's whether or not we consider it against the current system, or what we may find out is to the case with the government's proposed system. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood.
Thank you. I think it's also worth adding that if you look at the history of local plans in Maidstone since their inception, we produced our first local plan was the 1993 local plan, and I chaired the local plans group to guide that in. And then we had another one in the year 2000. Again, I was chairing the local plans group for much of that. Then we didn't have another local plan till 2017. So we went 17 years on the 2000 local plan. And then, you know, by 2024, we were undertaking a local plan review. So really, if you look at the times, government guidance has been all over the place in terms of where we go. And the whole thing has been changed and ripped up. And certainly that interregnum between the year 2000 and 2017, that was essentially, you had very kind of direct planning from central government around the urban capacity stuff. in the kind of Blair Brown years, which essentially ripped up almost local planning, and basically there was diktat from Westminster around identifying previously developed sites and developing them and freezing all greenfield sites kind of out and about. So it really did, turn things on their head. So I feel for Mr. Edgerton in terms of that guidance issue.
Thank you for that. Any further comments?
Sorry, I am going to labour the point. I mean, the strategic housing methodology assessment comes from central government. They crunch out the figures. If the numbers that they crunch out were always on the steady trajectory that we plan for in our local plan, our local plans would last until the end date that we put on them. The reality is what comes out is you need to build more in your borough. We haven't allocated for that in our local plan. Hence, that kicks off a local plan review and we go again. That's sort of the thing that we're in at the moment. If the numbers stayed steady, we could review the local plan in, I don't know, about 6 months to a year and go, it's all the same. We've got the same land supply. We've got everything, we're done. You don't need to kick off a massive review with all of the opening of the call for sites all over again if the central government's numbers had stayed the same, but they don't, so it kicks it off. And the other fact is, whatever we're building, I don't see the affordability coming down. So the simple matter is you don't build more and then you get cheaper housing. That hasn't happened, has it?
Councillor English.
Housing developers are businessmen. They are not going to release housing onto the market, however many planning consents they get, in order to bring the price down. And unless and until a government of whatever political colour starts giving councils the power to revoke planning consents that have been granted and not built out, that won't change.
I tend to agree with you on that one. Thank you. This report was for information and noting. Is that agreed? Thank you. On to item 12, the draft key performance indicators. And that's when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So the Policy Advisory Committee obviously includes performance monitoring within its remit, and the report is setting out the proposed draft list of KPIs for the 25-26 year. These KPIs have been fully reviewed and are presented under each priority area of the new corporate strategy. The KPIs ensure that we are transparently monitoring and overseeing the Council's progress against these priority areas, and performance indicators will continue to be updated and published on the Council's KPI dashboard, which, as a reminder, is accessed via the website. We also complement the dashboard with a half-yearly and an annual performance report on the performance position. So there are 21 KPIs proposed in the appendix that fall under this Policy Advisory Committee. They're split in the document under the corporate priority areas, and the appendix also details which portfolio each KPI sits under, as well as the details around frequency of reporting and whether the indicator will be a target or provided for context or information only. Of the 26 proposed for this committee, 6 are brand new indicators and 15 have been previously reported either to this committee or others in the previous year. So the recommendation is for you to propose the new set of KPIs to Cabinet, of course, including any additional indicators that the committee may wish to suggest.
Any comments, questions from anyone? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I just had one question because I love KPIs and I love reading KPIs, KCC, MBC, everybody puts together. So one question was, engagement events with businesses is going to be half yearly, but the number of businesses, startups receiving information, advice and guidance was quarterly. And I just thought it'd be more useful to have both of them quarterly just to see the figures together. I don't know if that's possible.
I can certainly feed that back to the service manager. The KPI around the number of businesses receiving advice is something that is already being monitored. So we know that is definitely available quarterly. The engagement events with new businesses is new. So we can feed that back to the service as to whether they can improve that frequency to be more frequent.
Thank you. No one else comments. So I propose the report. Do I have a seconder? I do. Thank you. We'll have either. Moving on to item 14, Brenchley Gardens refurbishment.
Thank you, Chair. We're doing a double-hander this evening. Councillor English will be following me as this is one of our cross-cutting portfolio items. As I intimated earlier, I've discovered there's a number of things that I don't know about Maidstone. I've been doing some reading and studying and discovered a whole bunch of things about Brenchley Gardens and its history that I did not know. Certainly I wasn't aware that Edward Lutyens, the architect, was responsible for our mini cenotaph in Brenchley Gardens, and the photographic record shows a very long and exciting and vibrant history of life in the town happening in that site and in association with Maidstone Museum. A great deal of thought and cross-council work has gone into producing what you may realise is quite a modest proposal this evening, but it is not for modesty of ambition that we've arrived at the place that we are at today. Certainly I've been recently with Natalie Moore and staff at the museum as we've considered what the relationship between events in Brenchley Gardens and Maidstone Museum might be. A whole raft of different possibilities have been considered. I'm sure members will want to know that. So if you're thinking, might we have been more ambitious, we have certainly thought of a wide range of alternatives. So to sum up for my part before I pass over to Mike Evans and colleagues after Councillor English, simply to say that we're having a serious but speculative attempt at something small scale and modest in order to build a new sense of momentum in the social life of the town. We trust that's successful and perhaps it will grow and thrive further. Councillor English, I'll pass over to you.
As my colleague says, Brenchley Gardens has a long and interesting history. It's the only Mackenzie designed park outside London. It is of significant historical and botanical importance. As a council, we have ambitions to further improve the park, both in terms of securing a green flag and also continuing the recovery of the area from an antisocial problem into a asset to the borough, which is well underway. As part of that, increasing the usage of the park by having a refreshment offer in the park is quite important. This may well not be the final position. It may be that we are able in time to bring forward the reuse of the building in the park. That may be. We are still looking at that, but so we haven't come to a final conclusion on that issue. There is some expression of interest around the town in doing that, but as an interim step, and this would also be part of the final solution, we would be bringing forward at this time an offer for a mobile facility in the park, which would also help, I think, with visitors to the museum. There is undoubtedly, in my view, there is undoubtedly a market for it as the number of outlets in that area continues to expand without any noticeable difficulty in selling cups of coffee. So I think there is everything to be said for this in terms of encouraging the use of the park. As I said, it may not be the final position, although I would expect it to be part of the final position if we do develop a more fixed asset in the area as well. But at this stage, I would hope for the support for what we are proposing to do as an immediate action to actually further increase the usage and popularity of this park. It has been a noticeable weakness of the events that we have held there recently, that there has not been a refreshment offer for some of the band concerts and so on and so forth. And I think that we have had a significant amount of public feedback about, wouldn't it be a good idea if we could buy an ice cream or a cup of coffee whilst watching the bands and so on. So there is, I believe, a demand for this.
Mark, are you going to? Mike, it's Mike, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. I think Councillors Thompson and English have summed it up, so there's nothing for me to add at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Forecast.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I think mobile refreshments is a great idea, so well done for that, and significantly more sensible than converting the block. Just a few questions. Why is the so the current block is used as a police beat office or something like that? Well, you can correct me. What I don't understand why its future remains uncertain. So perhaps you can enlighten me. Excellent. And in addition, for now, why I can't understand how the procurement process for this can cost £75,000. It's a lot of money.
I'm sure the officers can fill in on a later point, but in terms of the building, it was originally part of the grant submission made to the Home Office, which included a number of other features, including the improved CCTV coverage in parts of the town centre adjacent to Trinity and in Brewer Street, Cemetery cut through and so on. It was envisaged that it would indeed act as a community police station. However, between then and now, the model of policing developed in the Mid-Kent policing area has significantly changed. Therefore, it has become surplus to the requirements for the police force and cannot therefore be used for the original purpose. At the moment, is essentially being used for storage for some of the council's equipment, street cleaning equipment, bubblegum machines in particular, which is useful, I suppose, but not was envisaged. I think it will have to be repurposed for something at some point, and broadly within the parameters that the grant was allocated for, which is community use, not specifically police use, but community use of some sort. However, we are not at that stage. We are looking now for a practical solution to provide refreshments to support the activities in Brenchley Gardens at this time, and we will return to the wider question in due course. We do not want to be rushed into making the wrong decision simply because we've got an empty building, well, almost empty. Well, would you like to comment on the financial figure?
Yes, on the financial aspect, this might be a terminology thing in the document, Councillor Forecast. So the 75k figure is the type of procurement we run. Because we expect the value to be under 75,000, it means we go down one particular procurement route. If we expect the value to be more than 75,000, we would do a different type of procurement, a more detailed one. So it's the title given to the template document that I've used is where that figure comes from.
Rather than the amount we actually intend to spend, but it'd be under 75.
We intend to do the procurement exercise with all current staff on salary. So the cost of running the exercise will be minimal. And we will be looking for operators to pay us a sum to bring their refreshments kiosk into Brenchley Gardens. And the tender exercise will identify which operators are willing to work in that way. And then they would propose a sum to us. So it will be revenue generating for the council.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you. My question was just about whether we could add into the tender. I think it's a good idea, put the thing, there temporarily and see if people want to buy coffee for the events and stuff. Just two things. If we could add into the tender about not having single-use cups, because I know that for events and stuff, that's often what's mentioned at Moat Park not to use single-use plastics. And also, I just wondered about how tight we could be on like the litter requirements of the operator. So whether they could check the park, like, I don't know, after they cease trading on the day, just because we don't want to put extra work on our parks team to pick up the customer's litter or have the litter in the first place, which is hopefully what the, the keeping cups will do. Thank you.
Those are both very good points, and I think we'll try and take them on board.
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chair. This is absolutely the right way forward. I think it buys us time. I seem to remember a point where we decided to get rid of the cafeteria area in the museum. And part of the reason for doing that, excuse me, was that we've got plenty of coffee places in Fremlin Walk. And the idea was that, people would go to the museum and then come to Fremlin Walk. Actually, I don't think that's worked at all. And I do hear people in the museum or going to the museum, lovely museum, but we need somewhere to have a coffee. We need somewhere to have you can go to the loo, but you can't have a drink. So there's something missing here, and I don't know what it is. It will be something that we'll all have to work on. But certainly that is why I'm saying that this is really going to buy us time, and it's a great idea. We must do it. It's temporary, but it ties us over, and I'm sure it will be really good. I still think that people are still going to have somewhere to go to the loo. I'm trying to think where the nearest toilets are. Down the bottom of Fremlin's in Earl Street. So yeah, because one thing goes with the other, but one thing at a time. Yes, let's go with this, but we must look at this issue of what do we do with Brentford Gardens and the museum and its relation with Fremlin's. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
I'm delighted to hear Councillor seamlessly weaving in the appropriate sustainability targets, which are standard policy for this administration. You correctly anticipate that these are features that we've already got in our drafting process. I'm sure that the trainers at the Biodiversity and Climate Change training for councillors will be delighted to know that when you squeeze us, the first thing that comes out is the right sustainability criteria. Thank you, Councillor, for bringing that up.
Thank you. Any more comments? So this is, sorry, for noting. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh, I might get a grip at the end of the meeting. This is for agreeing. So I propose, do I have a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Greenham. Sorry.
It's with the additional comments, no doubt.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're all in favour of that? Thank you. Right. Item 15. Houses of multiple occupants planning. Yeah, the document, yes. Thank you. So that is Councillor Harwood.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. On page 80 of the papers, you will find the houses in multiple occupation draft document consultation. If all goes to plan, this will go out to public consultation on 31st of March, and we are looking to have a month consultation. So hopefully fairly soon we will be able to fill the national and local policy vacuum around houses in multiple occupation. And I'm sure you've all read the supplementary plan document, but my colleague Tom Huang is on the screen up there and can come in and answer any detailed questions. But it's a very comprehensive document, and it seeks to address all of the quality and quantity issues which have been a challenge in some parts of the town. And if I was to kind of point you to anything, it would be to Appendix 1 on pages 105 and 106. And that shows that it is really 3 wards that are the focus of HMO development. One being the High Street, which has the most significant number, then Stanton Oakwood, then my own Pendleton Heath ward. And I think it's where it's urban wards with a certain kind of housing. I think what it's worth stating is that the SPD addresses larger HMOs. So it's 7 and above rooms, individuals within the accommodation. And in terms of the smaller units, which can throw up their own challenges, there are a suite of different approaches being put into place for that, which my colleague, Councillor English, from an enforcement perspective around parking and refuse collection and so on can give chapter and verse. But of course, any HMO below 70 units is permitted development. And it's worth adding that the National Planning Policy Framework in one of the recent revisions, it actually removed the references to HMOs. So it made it somewhat more permissive in terms of the planning landscape. There's some quite interesting statistics around HMOs as well, in that nationally the numbers of HMOs are actually dropping, are falling away, and that drop is particularly pronounced in the capital, in London. The last data in 2023 shows a 23% drop in HMO registrations. But interestingly, it looks like there's an element of displacement going on, because the southeast local authorities around London have seen an increase of around 10%. And I think it is the housing market and economic issues are leading to that kind of demographic shift, if you like. But any questions, and Tom Wang is there to answer detailed policy spatial planning issues.
Yeah, I know we've got a visiting member who wants to come in.
Good evening. I just want to say it. Obviously, I'm very passionate about HMOs, given my area. There was just a few concerns that I have. I have already raised this, that the numbers don't match up in certain sections. At one point, it says that there's 199 licensed HMOs. In another section, the figures actually add up to 203. In a different section, they add up to 269. In one section, it says that there's 700 HMOs in total. And then in another section, it says 565. And just little details like the maps, they have dates on from 2023 and 2024, but you don't know when in those years. And I know from experience that in my ward, we have an increase of HMOs by roughly 3 every month. So I'm guessing that the information on the maps and the information in the numbers is inconsistent, because they're probably taken from different years, different times of years. I just think before we put this out, because me and my residents are excited to give our comments on this, just a bit of clarity and a bit of consistency would be really good. The other thing I was really interested in finding out more about is how you've come to the numbers with the complaints, because I'm sure a lot of my residents would love to know where they can go to complain about HMOs. I'm wondering if that's just collated from generic noise complaints, antisocial behaviour complaints, waste complaints, etc., or if there is a way that my residents can complain specifically about problems that they're having with their neighbours. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Forecast.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm grateful to Councillor Millam as well for the points that have been raised there. It, I will bring in Tom Huang, Madam Chairman, in a second, but I will just say I believe that Councillor Millam is correct. What we've done in this document, there's section C has slightly different numbers to this, paragraph 5.1. So in regards to the number of HMOs and so forth, my understanding is that that's caused by two separate documents, one being an earlier version of a document, and another one being a later version. But I'd like to bring in Tom Huang, if that's okay, who can just clarify the position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edgerton, and thank you, Councillor. I agree that the observation is correct, that a few numbers haven't added up. This is due to the difference of the evidence that we use and the difference in the dates of the database. And we're happy to offer to clarify this before the consultation commences.
Thank you, it was a bit loud. Right. Councillor Forecast.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a series of questions that if we can work through, that would be great. It says that applications will only be validated if parking survey / assessment is submitted. Is that new, or is that currently happening? Doesn't happen. Okay, excellent. And then a second. So after that, it says here it must demonstrate that adequate parking is available in the local area. But which is great. That's fine. Excellent. But a HMO in Fant was recently approved because it was near the town centre, and the town centre had enough parking, and that was deemed adequate. So I don't understand how this is getting around that issue.
If I may come back on that, I mean, it's not my area, but I know for a fact that even the new Kent County Council parking standards have big caveats about the location of development and its proximity to town centres, public transport, and so on. However, this SBD that's before us does seek to overcome that by introducing a policy which essentially treats each room as a flat, as if it was an apartment block. So currently there's a policy vacuum, as mentioned, where we're relying upon Kent County Council's parking standards, which you can drive a coach and horses through. But if and when this SBD is approved, we will have an HMO parking policy. So I think it should help in areas such as those you described.
I just point out, if you're referring to the HMO that was approved at the last planning committee, the issue wasn't parking in any sense, because what had happened was there'd been a previous appeal hearing and the inspector had turned down the property specifically because there were 2 habitable rooms in the basement, and that had been removed in the application. So when you're considering an inspector's appeal decision, if the grounds for the original refusal have been overcome, which they very specifically had, the parking issue on one way or the other doesn't actually arise. So I hope that clarifies where we were with that.
Thank you both, and thank you, Clive, for the historical context. Councillor Harwood, what is the parking policy then to deal with it? You mentioned there will be a policy when this is approved. Sorry, are you able to just tell me what it is quickly?
Sorry, yeah, on page 99, section 3.21, it describes the parking provision issues,
yeah,
and sets out the policy, and it actually describes the lack of clarity leading to inconsistencies currently.
Yeah.
And it proposes this that there is a policy which addresses the parking issue, which is quite complex because it also talks about the implication for parking permits in residence parking areas.
Yeah.
And it talks about, as I say, treating them essentially as one-bedroom flats for the purposes of planning.
So I agree with you. I think that's good to treat them as one-bedroom flats. So are we able to include in this, if it's not already, and correct me if it is, in order for a HMO to be approved, it must provide one car parking space at least per tenant in these 3 wards?
But it will be the policy of this council, if this SPD is approved, to have the policies that are set out here in terms of parking and treating as that. However, an applicant can put whatever planning application they like in, and if they can provide evidence that say it's in the high street in the middle of the town where parking is impossible, but therefore it is very close to transport and so on, I think we will potentially need to show some flexibility. So I think planning is on its merits, and you are never going to have a one-size-fits-all policy, but we currently have no policy. And with this document, in most of the areas, such as the areas around the town, that's what this policy has been written within that context.
To supplement that, essentially, this is about shifting the bar. So it's not a question of an absolute situation, but it's tilting the bar of the decision maker in a direction that we would want it to go. So it adds weight to our case, but it's not an absolute silver bullet.
No, thank you. Sorry, Joe, I know people want to jump in, but if there's a HMO application in Fant, let's say, just because it's near a bus stop or there's a cycle, whatever they're called, there's cycling provision, or it's near Maidstone West, or there's parking in Maidstone Town Centre, that is not sufficient enough for the residents. That doesn't provide local parking, which is needed, one space per tenant. So does this or does this not have a policy, or is it possible to have a policy where we only approve HMOs in these 3 wards if one parking space is allocated to every single tenant? Yes or no?
There will always be flexibility dependent upon the location. However, this policy relates to larger HMOs, and I think for larger HMOs, we are in a much stronger position than we are if it was, say, a terrace Victorian or Edwardian property, which was divided into 4 or 5, where I think it would be very difficult, and that will be slightly different parking approaches. But I think for larger HMOs, I think we are on much surer ground in tackling parking issues, and having a policy as set out here is much better than having no policy, and I see it as a step forward. But as in everything, we will test it. I have no doubt appeal in the very near future.
I'm not trying to discredit what you've done so far. I think I concur. A policy is better than no policy, but it's those Victorian houses turning into 3, 4, 5 bed HMOs, which is the problem in Fant. It's not necessarily the larger ones.
That is absolutely understood. But Clive and I and various officers met right at the beginning of the of this new administration to look at how we can reduce the negative impacts from the increase in HMOs, especially in the 3 wards I described. And Clive can probably talk better about the parking standards issues and the issues around bins and so on, but there are other ways to skin a cat. I think that's the issue. They are permitted development. So from a planning perspective, we don't have an ability to influence through that route. We have looked and taken legal advice on Article 4s and so on, but again, that is very unlikely to work in the circumstances we're describing. So I think we need to keep looking at the range of policies in terms of licensing. And I think that's the critical point. And that's picked up partly through housing, partly through environmental enforcement, if we can prove harm. And it's, you know, and what I see as the benefit of this policy for larger HMOs is it is about improving quality of life, not just for existing residents, but also for the residents of the HMOs, which I think is because they provide a very important role for many people who work in Maidstone Hospital, for example, for particularly in terms of single adults, where it's very, very difficult to find certainly accommodation that we can get universal credit to pay for. So we need to be quite careful in the way that we do it. But I will defer to my colleague on parking more generally.
I think the point is that we can only do so much through the planning route, but as you see, because other sections of our approach to HMOs have gone to other PATs, including yesterday, as you know, and that it's part of a suite of measures being brought forward across the piece, if you want to use that term, and we, as a council, will be looking at every tool available to deal with this, but there is only so much you can do through the formal planning system, as I'm sure you're aware. And taking away permitted development rights, there's no way we get an Article 4 across 3 wards of Maidstone. It would just never happen. So attempting that holy grail of the perfect will prevent us doing some good in the meantime.
Thank you, Chairman. So last point. Thank you both. I know I'm testing you. It says here that it must, so that the parking survey assessment will be submitted. That's great. And then it must demonstrate that adequate parking is available in the local area. Are we able to specify what the local area is? If you live in Fan, like, you know, the example, if you live in Fan, the town centre is not local for parking.
Local area would be hyper local. It would be the road you're on or adjacent roads. Right. Well, all I'm saying is out for consultation. If you want to tighten up the language, be my guest. We've tried not to be too specific in terms of roads, because obviously, if you took the Tunbridge Road, that, you know, you're at one end of the road and the other end isn't very local, if you know what I mean. So one has to be careful with the language. But when we say local, we mean local. We're not talking about half the town centre.
I think also, just as an addendum to that, we need to be very careful, because this is a planning document and we need it to actually stand up to challenge. And the framing of the wording, it very carefully fits in with the policies that are carried through from the local plan and the local plan review. So it might be worthwhile bringing Tom or Mark in, but my understanding is that essentially this is the wording that operates for other types of development, and we cannot, you know, kind of go outside of those parameters.
Councillor Russell.
Oh, I think Mark Edgerton was just going to reply, actually. I'll say something. Well, you looked like you were reaching for I didn't want to stop your moment of glory there, so go for it. Do you want, yeah, go.
I was due a moment of glory, Councillor. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, of course, paragraph 3.25 is helpful in this regard as well, and we refer also to the Lambeth method in terms of what is considered to be local. Of course, the standards themselves derive from Kent County Council standards in this regard, and whilst we can debate the sort of the specifics in that respect, we still have to go with the overall approach set by county as a highway authority in terms of the requirements and so forth. But we do refer to the Lambeth method so that we can be as specific as possible, and hopefully that helps clarify things. One thing I would actually say, as I've been brought in I've had a very useful debate on this matter, and it's really good that the supplementary planning document is already sort of instigating debate about its contents and so forth. The purpose of this is to go out on public consultation to ensure that we are engaging with everyone on the draft document, so they can formally provide their views on the document itself before we get anywhere near the adoption stage. So hopefully that the message goes out to the public that we are looking to receive the comments and representations on the document, and this is the opportunity to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is really to get my understanding better. So if I'm sitting in planning committee and an application comes in for HMO and it's over the permitted development thing, so this enacts, how does it enact? Because I'm just, where it's, as in the policies, if you know, normally they say, or you could say this development goes against policy, blah, 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 of the adopted local plan. All of this seems to reference policies that are in the local plan review. So I guess my question is, so I can probably explain it best on page 101. It talks about the waste storage and recycling storage, and it says that they must follow policy LPR SP 15 from the local plan review. And then it goes on further on 3.29 to say they should mitigate the visual impacts, have a dedicated enclosed bin storage areas, and all of that good stuff. If I'm sitting looking at an application that doesn't have that good stuff, how do I use this? As in, do you say it contravenes 3.29 of this supplementary planning document, and then that goes forward as one of the reasons, and then we see if that stands up? I just really want to get it sorted in my mind, if you don't mind.
Yes, the supplementary planning document is subordinate to the local plan review in this case, and cannot create new policies, but it can add to the existing policy framework within the local plan. So essentially, it's putting a layer of detail in beneath the policies, because currently there was a vacuum in relation to HMOs. So now it interprets the local plan policies for use in HMO applications. So it becomes a little bit more bespoke in those terms.
Yes, it could be cited as a reason, because as with the the current supplementary advice we have on residential extensions, which is often cited as grounds.
I think that is a really good example. The residential extensions supplementary planning document, it puts in space standards, for example. It allows us to put solar PV on them and things. In some ways, our SPD for residential extensions is stronger than our local plan in some areas of policy. But it's the small print underneath the policy as applies to a specific kind of development.
I just want to get, so you could say it doesn't have these things, but then ultimately it would be against the SPD and that local plan policy. That's how it's going to work.
If you were, say, refusing, you would refuse it on HOU, whatever,
Yeah.
and then reason, and then the small print underneath would be the SPD states a paragraph 3.24 X, Y, and Z.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I've got a few comments. In a past, 18 years ago, these were around then, and I actually worked for a short period as a cleaner, which was sent into these HMOs. Now you could have to clean the communal areas. Now you could have some that were kept absolutely immaculate and didn't need a cleaner in, but others were diabolical. But there was, I didn't see in this about bathrooms. I'm not up to date on planning regulations. So one of the questions was, are the individual rooms having separate bathrooms, or are they shared bathrooms? Because sometimes you could literally scrape the bath. You had to use a trowel to scrape. The other thing, the outside areas, again, some would be immaculate and some would be a tip that would encourage rats. Now, these issues are up to the landlords to sort out. So what sort of pressures would be put onto the landlords of those HMSOs to make sure that the green spaces for their residents would be kept up to scratch.
Yeah, section 3.16 talks about outdoor amenity space, and then it goes on to open space and does address those issues. And again, it's that point around we have overarching local plan policies on these issues. Essentially, this fills in some of the detail as applies. And I think the point that you make on the variable quality, which is the same for any sort of rented accommodation. There are good landlords and there are less good landlords. There's good accommodation and less good accommodation. And some landlords are really very good. And certainly I deal with a lot of homelessness cases, and the extra mile that some of the HMO landlords go in order to doing the paperwork and so on, and supporting people who have real difficulty claiming through the universal credit and so on for housing, and even giving them rail warrants to go to the various government offices and so on, is commendable. But there are others, and we know where some of them are, where it's a problem. I think where that is addressed is less through the planning route and much more through the licensing route, where housing colleagues and the team there go in if we know where they are. And and certainly when I was with the Kent Fire Brigade in the past and so on, and with emergency planning, we quite often discovered houses in multiple occupation that we didn't know were there until there was a fire in that block or there was an incident. So it's it's quite a complex sector.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to add to that, the report itself does make it clear that there is the licensing side of things and property management has to be kept separate from the sort of the planning legislation and side of things, which this SPD deals with. And the point that you've raised, which sounds awful in terms of bathrooms, it is dealt with, it's referred to within the SPD. It's paragraph 4.4 on section 4 on property management, which deals with that, and it does refer to the fact that the licensing requirements and the licensing conditions that are incumbent on landlords and so forth, but it wouldn't be specifically for the SPD itself. Thank you.
Thank you. One more.
Sorry, I don't want to bore you all, but when it says about demonstrating adequate parking, can the applicant or the assessor, and I suspect this is happening now, not say, well, actually there is sufficient parking because half of our tenants in this HMO are going to walk, half are going to get the bus, and who knows, they might cycle as well. How do these people will have car parking. You guys might not like car parking, that's fine, but they do park cars and they do drive cars. So and that's a fact, and that's what's happening. So how does it go about preventing developers and assessors saying, well, actually there's sufficient public transport, which the truth is, but a lot of people aren't using.
I mean, on that, all planning applications are determined on their merits. There is always awaiting a balancing exercise in relation to what's going on, and then you look at the compliance with the policy. If there is a reasonable case, our professional officers may take a view, and then members may take a different view if it's referred to planning committee. However, it is no different in terms of car parking standards than any other planning application. And if you do get town centre applications, they will be treated differently than a more remote location, potentially, because they will be able to evidence that sustainability. I think there's also the type of HMO has a bearing in terms of the cost and expense that's linked there. That all of those discussions were had in really great detail during the evolution of this document, And in the end, the approach outlined of treating each room as a single flat in policy terms was the one that worked, because we do that for blocks. There are lots and lots of blocks of flats in this town without any park, but in the town centre, and it's not necessarily worked out that well. But it is that the same planning balancing act needs to be carried out, and they need to be determined on their merits. But I think actually this SBD is pretty tough, I think, looking at the policies and looking at what's in there. And we will, when it goes out to public consultation, it will need to go to Kent County Council as the Highway Authority. It will go to others, and we'll wait and see what their reaction is. And then when we do get those responses from both statutory consultees and wider interested individuals, we will make a determination as to whether we need to tighten up these policies or whether they can be changed in any way. But I think as a starting point, treating them as a single flat in an apartment block seems common sense.
Thank you, Tony. Chair, can I just make a slight motion, recommendation, amendment that on 3.25b, where it says it must demonstrate that adequate parking is available. Can I add in the wording that identifies a minimum of 1 parking space per tenant, please?
Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Russell. So we'll take a vote on that. All those in.
Sorry. So on page 100, 3.25b. Have you got that, Richard, as well? Yeah. And then where it says about 4 lines down, it says it must demonstrate that adequate parking is available in the local area. I'm adding in, or proposing to add in the words that identifies a minimum of 1 parking space per tenant. That's what I'm saying is adequate.
I think very quickly on this, I think we need to be really careful, as I mentioned before, because we are simply reflecting the Kent County Council parking standards and the caveats and so on in there. We cannot create a brand new policy per se. We need to channel existing policies for that need. So I would want to bring officers in to give a view on whether we are able to change in that way, because it seems to kind of rule out the flexibility that the policy, both the Lambeth policy and the KCC policy, both contain.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I'm afraid that really to go beyond the standards is likely to cause us significant issues. It's inconsistent with the overall approach. And I'd like to bring in Tom Huang, who could perhaps provide us with a little bit of detail as to the logic of the wording in the first place.
Yeah, thank you, councillors, and thank you, Mr. Edgerton. I would like to explain why we could not introduce, some sort of thresholds or standards here. Because the reason being because we don't have the detailed evidence and the complications associated with undertaking evidence relating to HMO backing demands. As you know, HMOs usually typically have transient population with varying tenancies, and so therefore their packing demands will always be changing. So it's going to be very difficult to capture the actual demand there. Any data that we capture can only show a snapshot in time, so that cannot be reliable or representative of their actual demands there. So therefore, it would be very difficult to undertake some sort of evidence And without the evidence to justify why we are producing or introducing this quantitative thresholds, we cannot introduce that, if that makes sense.
Thank you. So if I've understood, the evidence building for my wording to be introduced would be very difficult, but not impossible. It's hard.
I would say it's very difficult, and it also takes a long time. And even when we can capture that, as I mentioned, it can only show the snapshot in time. It can only show that sort of picture at the point that we go out for survey, but it cannot really represent the whole picture.
Thank you. Coming in as chair, I think we need to take the officer's advice, because where you're also saying per resident, some of these could be double occupant rooms. So are you then looking at both of those occupants having a car space, which would be unpractical and also probably impossible? So
building evidence is difficult, and I do appreciate the officer's advice. It's not impossible, so I would like a vote on my proposal, please, if possible.
As I said before, the pursuit for perfect is going to mean that we won't get the good. So if you want to wait 2 or 3 years to introduce a HMO policy, by all means, go down the path that you're suggesting. What I would suggest is that if you do want to pursue this, there is a way of doing that, which would be to adopt the SPD as it roughly stands in terms of the car parking standard, and in the after that, do the research to possibly tighten it under a later stage, because that way, the other way of doing it around means we won't have a policy in place for 2 or 3 years more, and I don't really want to be in that position.
No, you know more about planning than me, Clive, and I appreciate your view, but I mean, the cabinet will have to decide, and it will go to consultation. So it's not pressing anyway. But I'm not comfortable without that wording of a minimum 1 space per tenant, and therefore I would like it to be voted on, please.
Hold on, because there's a lot of people over this side who wanted to speak as well. I know we need to take a vote. I would rather, I think, take the vote now as opposed to having, yes. So all those in favour of the amendment? Oh, you can.
I wasn't going to say much, actually. I was just going to say that being a rural member, it's town centre. Obviously, people that mention the HMO a lot, and what I hear about all the time is the bins and the parking. So if we're going to introduce something that's better than what we've got now, I think the bins seem to be well sorted in here. That looks great. I do think we need to reach for that parking wording. It might be the wording, we could put that wording in, and through the consultation it could change slightly, because obviously this isn't the finished document, but I think we should reach for it. So I'm happy to second Councillor Forecast's motion amendment. Sorry.
Thank you.
Just if I may come back very quickly, I think it's a technical issue in relation to the hierarchy of plans. We cannot have a different parking standard for one type of accommodation for HMOs than we have for any other sort of accommodation and building, because it's an SPD and not a development plan document, and not a local plan policy. So I think the point is not an argument with the concept. The point is just a technical thing about what an SPD can do. It can interpret the policy landscape we're within, and we cannot create a brand new policy just for one type of accommodation. However, I come back to the point that what we are reflecting is that each room in a larger HMO is the equivalent of a one-bedroom flat. And it's a tried and tested parking standard approach. And I think an inspector would buy that. I do not think an inspector would buy a brand new policy around individuals that doesn't have any evidential underpinning. And I think that's what the officers are trying to say. It's a technical point. So yeah, we will kind of wait and see, I think, once we have this document, how it works.
Can I ask, do you wish to withdraw your motion? So we will take the vote then. All those in favour? That's 2. All those against? No, you haven't got a vote, councillor. I vote against. So that's lost, thank you. Any abstains? So 1 abstain. Thank you. Which is not a bad thing. Right, we have 2 recommendations on page 71. So the first one is to approve the draft statement. Is that agreed? Hello? Oh, sorry. I thought it was all on the same thing. All right. Right, councillor.
But all I wanted to add was, if we're going down the sort of specifics of those things, I'll be getting the figures clarified that Councillor Millen mentioned before we approve it. Because if there's a disparity in those figures, I don't think it's something we can vote on until we've seen what the actual figures are. Because if we're debating that sort of tiny detail, Councillor Millen's point has to be addressed first. Thank you.
Further to the information I provided and was provided by Tom Huang earlier, I think the thing that we can clarify straight away is the intention that we will, before we go out on consultation, clarify the numbers that are set out there within the SPD itself. There does appear on face to be a discrepancy between them, but as Tom Huang has suggested, it was caused by the one referred to by a housing strategy and one by a subsequent document. That's the sort of thing which we're going to have to clarify. And I think as long as we can do that, and the second recommendation allows for that to happen in the report, in the papers, it gives us the ability, because it's a factual update. But if I can provide that reassurance to members, we will most certainly do that before we get out to consultation. Hopefully that will assist. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I think what Tom Huang stated is essentially every time you do a piece of work, it's a snapshot in time. So therefore, if you do a piece of work a week later, a week earlier, the numbers are going to be slightly different. But I think as long as that is placed into context, that evidential underpinning does still work. But I agree that we do need to evidence why we're using different figures.
Thank you. Councillor Greenman, did you want to come in? I think you.
No, I just wanted to say, obviously, at the end of the day, we are talking about residents and people in the town who live in HMOs who contribute massively to this town. And sometimes it just feels like it's become a war on parking. I recently visited an HMO with 6 rooms and only 1 person could actually drive in this HMO. But you know, they'd been having to put up with comments from other residents in the road. They were taking up all the parking spaces, etc. But that HMO only actually had 1 car. And I do worry that if we're very insistent with developers about minimum parking spaces, we're going to reduce the ability to accommodate some of these key workers in the town unless we come up with other ways to accommodate them.
Thank you, Councillor Conrad.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, what I had to say was to do with the motion. I was hoping to speak prior to the vote, so it's no longer valid.
No, thank you. Right. Getting back to, unless anyone else has any comments, getting back to the recommendations, do we agree recommendation 1? Yes, agreed. Thank you. Recommendation 2? Thank you very much. Moving on now to item 16, the Headcorn Neighbourhood Plan decision statement. So that is Councillor Harwood again.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'll keep this one short and sweet. This is very procedural. It's not subjective. Essentially, we are assisting this process, but it's Headcorn's plan, and there is an inspector, for want of a better term, that's overseeing it, and we're just helping the process along. And there's a little bit of an impasse between the two to a certain extent, but we're getting there. I don't know if Mark was to come.
Yes, absolutely. They've been on a journey of Headcorn, and it's lovely. We've had some good working with the parish council. They've made it through Regulation 14, Regulation 16 consultations. They've made it through the examination. Yes, the examiner does want some changes to some of the policies, but we are now at the stage where, as a council, we can issue the decision statement, which is the examiner's recommendation that if the modifications are put in place, that this can proceed to referendum. So it's good news. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to come in on this? So there again, 2 recommendations. Recommendation 1, do we agree? Thank you. Recommendation 2. Thank you. And they were on page 119. Item 17, the Bluebell Hill Improvement Scheme. Oh, God.
Again, I won't kind of make this very long. Colleagues will remember that back in 2020, that there was a consultation on some very sensible changes which reflected our local plan indeed to the roundabouts, the Running Horse roundabout and the interchange at the top of the hill at Bluebell Hill. We responded to that, thought it would move within as an affordable project that would leave in funding and help with traffic flows. Then suddenly a second consultation comes out where the scheme has gone up. It is just massive. It's now a £250 million scheme with additional lanes coming south, which came as a real surprise for the residents who live in Chatham Road, I've got to say. And we are a major landowner, it's got to be said, along that stretch, and it came as a little bit of a surprise to us as well. It also appears that the proposal seems to be contrary to the NPPF as well, which is alarming. Tom Gilbert is on the screen, and he has put together what I think is a very good response. However, there has been some feedback from particularly the local communities affected, and I agree with their suggestion that we should perhaps expand upon the sections around the impact on local residents of the scheme as it's set out, because those communities at Sandling would be quite profoundly affected by the proposal as is set out. So I know that my colleague will come in as the ward councillor, but I think we can potentially expand the section around the impact on Sandling residents. And I think there's also a suggestion that looking at quite a large infrastructure project within the national landscape, we talk about the national landscape impact in terms of the landscape proper and in terms of impact upon protected species and so on. I think we perhaps need to major a little bit more on the nitrogen deposition issue in the special area conservation in the Detling to Waldham escarpment, because that has suddenly reared its head in relation to some housing developments in the area. And I dare say that relatively small housing developments in my ward will have much less of an impact on nitrogen deposition within the SAC than a significant increase in highway capacity. But if I perhaps hand over to Tom, he can pick up anything that I may have missed. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood, and thank you, Chair. Yes, so just to add in terms of what Councillor Harwood was saying, so in terms of the sort of details of the consultation, the purpose of the consultation is to, and the programme for the preferred works is to allow for an easier flow, shall we say, from the M2 to the M20 as a result of the Lower Thames crossing. So that's why at the top end, at the M2 end, there's easier access from the A229 onto the M2 and then vice versa. And then at the bottom end, there will be an expansion of the junction onto the M20 with an extra lane, slip road lane coming on, and then, as been previously mentioned, the 3 lanes coming down the southbound towards Maidstone. In terms of the practical timeline for this, there will be another stage in 2026 where planning permission will be sought, and then in 2029 the start of the construction phase with a completion in 2031, and the idea of that is that's completed before 2032 when the Lower Thames crossing is to be opened. So that's the timings on that. But hopefully, obviously, as Councillor Harwood has mentioned, we've reflected that we have some significant concerns around the landscape impact on the Kent Downs national landscape. Within that, we've referenced our green infrastructure strategy. We've also referenced the other documents such as integrated transport strategy, where we have concerns around active travel and sustainable travel impacts, because there are some specific concerns around loss of cycleways and bus stops. And also we have referenced the impact on at the southern end in tree preservation orders, where the running horse interchange will be expanded towards the Audi garage, where there could be potential impact on our tree preservation orders in that location. So that's probably just adding a bit more detail there, but yeah, happy to take any further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you, Councillor Harwood. To emphasise, I'm speaking in my capacity as ward councillor for Boxley Downs at this point, not as a cabinet member. Although we've had this conversation with cabinet, and it has been agreed that clearly Maidstone Borough Council's response should speak for its residents and take view of local ward councillors. Members will note that this consultation has been carried out at some speed. The concluding date for submissions is the 17th of March. The third open public consultation was last Saturday. So the 2 ward members met with 50 local residents at the conclusion of last Saturday's meeting. We've sent questions to County Council and obtained answers from them this week, and we're reconvening a residents' meeting this coming weekend, at which point we will then be able to bring those comments to Cabinet and to Councillor Harwood. So in brief, to point out that Councillor Neil Baker of Kent County Council correctly stated that the outcome of the consultation in 2020 referring to the 229 M2 interchanges at Lord Leaders and Taddington at the top of the hill was indeed based on previous consultation, but it was misleading to make that statement with regard to the modifications in Sandling. Some members may need to hear in passing, Sandling used to be the road to Chatham. where one might have travelled by horse and cart or whatever other means it might have been, past attractive mill buildings, a large, no doubt, duck festooned mill pond and such like. I will confess that it was many years of my adult life before I discovered what Sandling used to be and realise what is left of it squashed under gazillion tons of concrete and so forth. The residents' consternation to discover that there's a proposal to put yet another lane and remove 8 metres of gardens at Sandling Village just recently, you can imagine, didn't make their day. I heard account last weekend of persistent vibration that is shaking the plaster off the walls in at least 2 properties in Chatham Road. This is absolutely not a minor issue. On pages 196 and 197 of your papers, the ticks that are shown there in these draft proposals, I think, pretty much reflect what the residents would want us to say. I think we're looking for the word Chatham twice on page 199. As Councillor Harwood has acknowledged, I think that the comments on pages 218 and 219, the section 2 comments on the scheme from Maidstone Borough Council, we can expect those to include comments from the residents' meeting next week. The response that I got from County Council officers this week shows that, for example, I won't bore you with all of the details, but for example, there have been no air quality measurements or noise assessments carried out at Sandling at the past at this present time. So there is no baseline data to assess what the immediate impacts will be on this small community right next to what is, to all intents and purposes, a motorway between 2 motorways. And they were particularly exercised about the idea of having more traffic lights at the bottom of the running horse when the Cold Harbour roundabout is doing quite nicely without them. So just to point in, I don't think that that's a feature that has been mentioned here yet. So my comments really are to establish that these draft proposals have been put on to the Sandling community suddenly and without any prior warning. And they are not particularly pleased about that, but we will combine their comments as constructively as we can. And I'm sure Councillor Harwood will be ready to publish that response so that members can see it, although it will need to follow this meeting, obviously.
If I may come back, Chairman, I mean, it won't be verbatim, but I think we would reinforce the sections talking about the human impact of the proposal. I think that's the critical point here, because that has really come out loud and clear. I mean, I've spoken to some very upset people recently, and it was a very profound shock, because from the 2020 consultation, never in a million years would you imagine that we would get a second consultation on such a scale.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you. Of course, KCC are well known for listening to our views, particularly Cranbourne Avenue is one that sticks particularly in my mind. I suppose my question is, I don't know much about the scheme other than the general, so happy to go with what you've said. I suppose my question is, we've changed quite a lot from the 2020 to this response. Do we want to build in something about we liked the 2020 scheme? It seems like we've just canned the whole thing. So when not knowing loads about it, when I've read it, the first one, it looks like we're in favour, we love it, fits with our local plan, excellent. And the second one we've gone to, we hate it, we hate everything about it for this reason, this reason, this reason. And I just wondered if there was I don't want to say a midpoint, but was there a point where we could build in, but if you went back to this, I like infrastructure. I like it to come not at the expense of everything, but I do like it because I think, we need it. And I know that this road in particular, and this is very unsafe. So I just wondered, was there a bit we could build in where we said if we went back to that 2021, we'd be back on board again?
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, for example, the new access from the roundabout for the lids in scheme was part of the local plan and is required. I think the problem we faced in responding to this is that the scheme is almost like a completely separate scheme, because before there were changes to the roundabout and there were new legs off roundabouts and it was slightly larger. But however, because of the new road configuration and a new interchange with the lower bell, it's changed the entire thing and the whole scale of the project. But we will take that away and look at that because it's very similar actually to another scheme in Maidstone, the Bearsted Road, where the local, the local county councillors, Paul Carter and Ian Chittenden, the local residents were all happy with the original scheme, and then suddenly it grew and everyone was very unhappy and it promptly ran out of money and is now half built. And I think that is the real worry. What happens to these things that you go through a consultation process, you think you've got something, and then they some kind of future redundancy is built in, which really frightens the horses in terms of the local residents. It's so yes, I think we'll have a look at that point around what on earth has happened between 2020 and now to reflect such a significant growth. But as I say, we will be revisiting this before it goes to cabinet. We have got time in this one to take it back to cabinet. We can look at the wording. We can bring in more about the impact on local residents. We can amplify the nitrogen deposition issue that's been raised, and we can do that compare and contrast with the original 2020 proposal.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Keeley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Harwood, you kind of touched on my question was going to be is, do we know why it's changed so radically? What have they given any reasoning for that? Because like you say, it's such a huge change. Is there a specific reason for that, or is that a bit of a mystery?
If I may come back on that, I think the justification that's given is the Lower Thames crossing and some, it's not modelling. It's just there's a Lower Thames crossing, so that might lead to more. But the problem we've got is that the National Planning Policy Framework removed what used to be called predict and provide, and now says that you need to think about things like public transport and different approaches and spatial distribution and development. So we have raised in our response that just because there's going to be another big piece of infrastructure doesn't necessarily mean that every other piece of infrastructure has got to grow as well. That's not what the NPPF says. The NPPF says you've got to look at case by case about the specific issues. The specific issues led to the 2020 scheme. This one seems to have brought in, well, we got a big scheme up there in North Kent, it was the impact. I have to say it came as a really big surprise to Medway Council as well. I saw the leader of Medway Council on the day this came out, and he was as startled as we were as to what would happen. And you would think Medway would be the key focus for this, because really that link, it's only a bit of it really is in Kent proper. A lot of it is affects the Medway Council area far more, which makes it all the more surprising that some of these changes have been brought in. And I think one of the other concerns that's come out from local residents I've spoken to that actually live in Tunbridge and Morling, around Bluebell Hill Village and that sort of area, is that essentially you're creating a big interchange onto some very minor roads. Those who know the roads around Kitts Cotty and so on, the idea of having a major roundabout off of a trunk road like this that make taking traffic onto those back roads up round Kitts Cotty and Countless Stones and the Lower Bell, it does not seem to make much kind of sense, or to be very safe or conducive to a good quality of life. But we will amplify all of those points when we revisit this. But this was very much a starter at 10, just to get your views on it and what we can kind of add. And things are developing all the time. I think it's only really dawning upon the local communities in the northern part of the borough just how profound the impact will be from this. And as you've heard, people losing their gardens, you're not losing your garden to a minor development, you're losing your garden to what will become a very, very wide, very fast piece of infrastructure. Yeah, it's really challenging.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, with the
So thank you, Chairman. I'm really keen to make sure that what's gone on this evening does get fed in, but is there the time? Is it necessary to bring it back to PAC? I'm trying to make sure that we can enable everything that's been said here to move on in time to meet that deadline.
Right. In terms of the timetable, we got quite a lot of time for this one in March when it's got to be submitted. It gives us time to take it through the usual channels and go to Cabinet. Unlike the next one, which is much tighter turnaround, and that will need to be a Cabinet member decision. So I hopefully you will see in the Cabinet report the narrative being expanded to acknowledge some of the issues that have been raised today, and it will go through the normal route. But we do need to hit the March deadline, the late March deadline, obviously, or we risk not having our voice heard. And on the point that was raised earlier around Kent County Council don't necessarily listen to us on things, this is within the national landscape. It abuts a special area conservation which is higher than a triple SI. It's not just kind of Kent County Council and the district council. There's a lot of very significant stakeholders in this. So I think they will have to listen. You can't just do things to national landscapes and special areas of conservation. You need to abide by certain rules. So I think, you know, our voice will be heard.
Sorry, Chairman, it does mean that I therefore won't approve item 1 on the recommendation, because I don't want it to be submitted as it is, because there's this extra work that needs to be done. Or am I thinking along the wrong lines?
I'd so not putting words into your mouth. You know,
Please do.
The amendment or the chairman's kind of narrative on this is, you know, subject to those matters which have been raised by the committee.
Yeah, I was just going to say, subject to those matters raised by the committee, particularly with regard to referencing the 2020 scheme and our approval of that scheme. Yeah, I know.
And the impact on residents in the community at Sandling, and the the impacts upon the Detling to Waldham escarpment SAC. I think that sweeps up everything unless there's anything I've forgotten.
Do we need to have that as a proposal and vote on it? Yes. Yeah. So, Councillor Gooch, you proposed it.
Well, do you want to do it? Because I've got it subject to the matters raised by committee, particularly regarding the 2020 consultation, or 2020 scheme, impact on residents in Sandling, and then I lost it.
And then the SAC, I think we'll cover that last bit.
What was the last bit?
And the impact on the SAC.
Right, thank you. So we have a proposer, seconder. Seconder, thank you. Did you want to come in and speak? Or no? So all those in favour of that amendment? Yeah, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Any other comments? No. Sorry, councillor. Yeah.
I think we do need to do the second point as well, because it said to delegate authority to the head of spatial planning, economic development to undertake minor changes and finalise the report prior to submission. So I propose that as a separate thing so that we tidy this all up. We've done number one. I don't think we've cleared off number two.
Number two.
Yeah.
So yeah, just before we agree on number two, just say I hope. I mean, it's going to be a nightmare if Operation Brock comes in if they do this. It's going to be gridlock. I mean, it is at the moment anyway sometimes, but it's going to be an absolute nightmare. Right, sorry, I just wanted to put in my little 2 penneth there. So proposal 2, are we agreed? Thank you. Right. Moving on to item 18, transport for the South East draft transport strategy consultation. Recommendations on page 242.
If I may come back on this one has got a very tight turnaround. 7th of March, we need to respond by. And in terms of the consultation responses before you, essentially, Transport for the South East is a grouping of the local authorities and the other transport providers, public sector transport providers within the South East region. The document, it's quite a progressive document, actually. I mean, it does talk very much in around strategic transport choices, which are good for communities and make things like our local southeast airports and so on work in a more sustainable way. So I don't think there is anything to dislike too much about it, but I will bring in Tom again, and he can give you just a little more detail on the officer responses currently set out.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Harwood. Yes, so as mentioned, this is probably a quite strategic level document. So it covers a wide area all the way from Kent all the way to sort of the Isle of Wight, and it's sort of looking at how we transform the transport system and drive economic growth is sort of the two purposes of Transport for the South East, and that's a non-sort of statutory body. It involves 4 things in the document. So it has an overall vision, 5 missions, and then global policy interventions, and then ways of delivering it. And these are sort of set out in the report, paragraphs 2.3 down to paragraphs 2.13. And in terms of this document, it builds on an existing strategy that Transport for the South East has in 2020, so it's almost a review and an update. And the next steps for it would be to publish an updated version later in 2025. No specific date has been given, but they said later in 2025. And overall, our response is fairly supportive of the missions and the mechanisms for delivery. I suppose the only things we have concerns with are to point out, and these are pointed out in paragraph 2.15, are around the impact on the environment, biodiversity, sort of fragmentation through some of the missions are around things like the bifurcation strategy in Kent. So the idea of using the M2 and the M20. So this is just concerns around the potential impact there as well. But that's probably, I'll leave it there. And if there's any questions, happy to take them.
Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. To highlight the fact that we have now seen at this meeting a whole range of different means of responding to consultations. You will note that Director Karen Britton has been with us on the call this evening. We haven't troubled her with any questions today, but I would point out that there are 2 surveys that have come out again very last minute and with very short turnaround times. One of them was on intermodal transport, which we asked the director to give an officer response to there simply wasn't time to bring it to any of our meetings, which wasn't our fault. In this case, we have managed to bring this one to your attention, and you'll note I'm grateful to Tom Gilbert for uttering the magic words economic growth during his précis of the points. I'm satisfied as the Cabinet member responsible for economic development that the text here in this brief and focused response gives enough of a nod to the points that we made at length in the industrial strategy, which we brought to this committee a small number of months ago. We're happy to use that terminology in the understanding of what kind of growth it is that we're talking about. And as you can tell from this response, there's enough qualification of what sustainability actually means that we think that we're on the same page. So I just wanted to spell out that we have bent over backwards with the officer's energetic assistance to try to include you in the loop as much as possible in giving accountability about this to timescales that we did not set. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone? Any comments, questions? Thank you very much. So there are two recommendations. Do we agree both of them? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending today's meeting. And I now declare this meeting closed, and a safe journey home, and hope all those of you who are suffering with your coughs get better soon.